Democracy has not made them safe, yes. Democracy has not ended years of oppressive and suffocating corruption, yes. And yes, our people are still caught in the cusp of violence. However, our situation today is evident that our people have nailed their hopes for progress and development on the mask of democracy with all its flaws and very hostile, strong headwinds. It is historic for us in Nigeria that Nigeria has conducted 7 successive back-to-back elections since 1999 till date. These elections have been seriously flawed, they have been bloody, they have been chaotic, they have been below par. Yet, unlike a few years ago, Nigeria, neither the losers nor frustrated citizens of Nigeria have called the military to stage a coup, as it was, and it has always been the history of our country. Our people have now realized that military rule has proved itself to be a cure worse than the disease, and that the military itself has also realized the institutional damage it suffered from years of being in power. Therefore, the challenge now is for Africans of this generation to ensure that in our hands, the seeds of democracy are nurtured. Because of Nigeria, despite our troubles, despite our uncertainties, it has often been said that Nigeria, the unity of Nigeria is like a Catholic marriage. It may not be happy, but it doesn't break up. This discussion is timely and auspicious. However, your topic, How Democracies Die, should be replaced by a more hopeful title, How Democracies Can Survive. For indeed, who has ever seen the corpse of a dead democracy, or even once a carcass? Our concerns, of course, should be on how to learn lessons about the consequences of democracy dying and seeking how to avoid what is happening across Africa. Any good driver seeing another car in the ditch after an accident would do well not to pity the car that is in the ditch, but to obey the rules of the road. And there is a saying in Hausa, for those of you who speak Hausa, translated, it says, if you see your brother's beard on fire, put water on your own. Africans must learn that democracy is hard work with no easy answers, not because Africans are not searching well, but because those easy answers are not found anywhere. Revitalizing the civic space by free speech, a free media, and a civil society that is alive to its challenges is the best strategy of keeping authoritarianism at bay and keeping people hopeful. Ahead of Nigeria's return to democracy in 1999, I published a book titled Democracy and Civil Society in Nigeria. And my conclusion in that book, then as now, very simple, that democracy and autocracy cancel themselves out. One cannot exist if the other, both of them cannot coexist, because one's existence defeats the existence of the other. This is neither the time nor the place to debate or define democracy. However, it is important to note that each democratic seed has had its own story of growth, harvest, or failure, depending on where and when it was sown, who nurtured it, on which soil, under what weather, and to what end. By way of definition, the world has come to accept Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg speech definition in 1863, that democracy is a government of the people, for the people, and by the people, as literally cast in stone. However, on further interrogation, there are gaps in democracy's definition and its operational claims. Once we shift gears to identify geographical locations, cultures, and perceptions of who the people are, and who defines who the people are. And I cannot improve on what President Obasanjo just said, because I told him the quote of what he said should stand side by side with Abraham Lincoln's claim. And what is also very interesting is that Abraham Lincoln delivered this speech in 1863, and it's the same 1963, much later, 100 years later, that Martin Luther King delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech. And you notice that even in that speech, which was delivered, if you are familiar with Washington, with the statue of Abraham Lincoln, saying there, when Martin Luther King says 100 years ago, he was referring to the Gettysburg speech. But of course, he makes the point that 100 years later, all the promises that were made or conceptualized in that speech have never really been realized. And I think we can repeat the same thing, that there's always a distinction and a dissonance between the claims of politics and political rhetoric of when people are in campaign and the realities when governance takes off. So for me, Fundamental to how democracy grows and is appreciated is the need to develop a political culture. But of course, we accept, and we also know that systemic and consistent interruptions of this process by the military in Africa has created a sense of a culture of cynicism among our people. So if we are concerned about how democracies die, then like all dreams, we must accept the causes, that the causes are not the same. Because why X died is not the same with why B is alive. Therefore, when we speak of institutional fragility, shrinking spaces, the weakening and dismantling and weakening of democratic system, do we see them as causes or consequences of the death of democracy? In other words, are we perhaps confusing the symptom with the disease? Particular diseases do not kill everyone. Not everybody who is suffering from cancer necessarily dies. Some people live longer. Not everybody people die of malaria. People die of all kinds of things. How do we explain the fact that the same sickness strikes one person, kills the person, but then other people are able? The medical people will tell you it depends on your immune capacity. Therefore, during the period of COVID, for example, the records seem to suggest, not necessarily, but at least that's what the doctors were saying, that most people who died during COVID had other underlying ailments, which COVID simply exploited. And I think we can therefore say the same thing about democracy, that its capacity and ability to survive depends on what are the underlying socio-economic, cultural conditions around which democracy is supposed to grow. In the last 20 or so years, the world has witnessed reversals and decline in many countries in Europe and America. We have witnessed the rise of what is now called illiberal democracies, sustained by right-wing hate groups. We are witnessing the rise of terrorism around the world. Although all of these pose severe threats to democracy, I would rather that we speak of the challenge to democracy rather than its death. In my view, as long as humans exist, there will always be democracy. If we see democracy from the point of view of its leaders, presidents, institutions, parliaments, senators, senate presidents, political associations, political parties, then we can contemplate its death, because all of these institutions are subject to human mortality. However, when we see democracy as part of the human instinct, thirst, hunger, and quest for love, for fairness, for integrity, for a sense of belonging, for community and family, then as long as these ideals exist and they sustain and define humanity, democracy cannot die. The democratic instinct and ethos is already embedded in our DNA. To be sure, politicians and political parties, parliaments, constitutions can be banned or destroyed, as we have seen with autocrats in uniform or out of uniform. But the human instincts that are supposed to nurture cannot die. We can therefore argue that certain types of structures for the pursuit of human happiness, security, and well-being could collapse in the hands of wicked men and women, but others will spring up. Democracies might die in form, just as food, arts, social habits differ among our peoples and countries, but the essence still remains the same. Now, you heard about Nigerians' jollof rice. Ghanaians are free to produce a poor copy, but still jollof rice. But when you know yourself that when you eat jollof rice in Ghana, when you eat jollof rice in Kenya, you know that they are just practicing. The problem of many African countries, but you might say jollof rice is jollof rice, but there are differentiations. The problem with many African countries is that they never really experience successful transitions. After colonial rule, and I think, again, my friend, Professor Ihonvere, has written extensively about this, that is the assumption that we have that we transited to democracy. No, transition from dictatorship is not logically transition to democracy. In part because, as we saw with successful transition, especially by the military, they still managed to embed within the system of transitions landmines that later on exploded to send us back to the bottom of the hill. So we went through rudimentary elections, but we never even developed a political culture. Africa transited from colonialism, military dictatorship, but did not successfully transit to democracy. The military often sowed many landmines. So when Western liberal democracies, which we have adopted across Africa, with their focus on free markets, when we neither have the freedom nor the markets, presupposes a capitalist economy when we don't have the capital. focusing on such concepts like transparency, accountability, a free media, human rights, a free judiciary, rule of law, and a lot of talk about fighting corruption. The elevation of these concepts does not address other fundamental cultural factors that blur the lines in many African cultural discourse. And there are many people here, I'm sure President Obasanjo will also sign on to that, that in many African languages, for example, Western liberal democracy insists that opposition is institutionalized as part of democracy. But for many African countries, we're struggling, we're thinking in English, but unable to speak in vernacular. Because what does really opposition mean? And of course, many people will argue that because opposition is read in the vernacular as somebody who is an enemy, that is why it is easy for the reflex of the African politician to want to either bump off anybody who poses himself as an opposition. But of course, the system itself is not attractive because I served as a member of the Electoral Reform Committee in Nigeria. One of the things we saw was that you had cases where, for example, the dominant political party is such that everybody has to belong. And people who decided to vote differently, when they went back to their communities, the communities literally sent them back. They said, we don't want to be in opposition, because they know the consequences of being in opposition. So when we talk about this concept, it's important that we understand the cultural context in the African situation. The elevation of this concept does not address other fundamental issues. Anti-corruption waiting agencies, for example, sidestep the fact that corruption and other manifestations in African politics are often the symptom and not the disease. The Mo Ibrahim Index, for example, broadly measures the efficacy of democracy by such concepts like freedom, political participation, media, freedom, education, human rights, security, transparency, accountability, anti-corruption, sustainable development, among many others. And there is no doubt that democracy is imperiled today, but it is not dead. Let us not become victims of what I call exaggerated pessimism. The story of the United States of America is a lesson. After over 200 years, the behavior of Donald Trump and his supporters on June 6, 2022 suggests that time and experience very often are not reasons for us to go to sleep. Because the human instinct for violence doesn't ever go to sleep. Therefore, we must remain vigilant over the claims that democracy makes. And the point, therefore, is that no matter how long democracy has been in our country, it is the strength of the institution that sustains the occasional assault to this foundation. Now, of course, if you live in a country like Nigeria, Ghana, and many African countries, a culture of cynicism has been embedded, because if you talk to Nigeria, people tell you, are we going to eat democracy? If you tell them it's going to take a long time, they say, how long is long enough? Yet, history suggests very clearly that democracy and its quest has no shortcuts. The challenge for those who govern is to ensure, I often use the metaphor of, I think women call it the pacifier. This little plastic rubber that women put in the mouth of a child. The child is sucking the rubber. There is nothing inside the rubber, but at least it enables the mother to continue cooking without disturbance. So in a way, African politicians must give us some plastic rubber to continue to manage between now and the next election. Democracy's womb possesses many seeds, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's not so much the quarrels that politicians engage in. In fact, many ordinary Nigerians, including myself, continue to encourage our people. Please, when you see these politicians fighting, even if they are throwing chairs among themselves in parliament, don't kill yourself, because they will still close the door and distribute the money of state among themselves. In that area, there is no fight. So very often, many of us jump into thinking that, these politicians don't like themselves. No, they like themselves. Even armed robbers have common interests. So let's measure our enthusiasm, because very often we think that democracy is about to fall because our people are always fighting. As a priest, I have experience of helping resolve problems of marriage. In the end, I've had family, women and men, come to me and say, look, our marriage is no longer working. We're 10 years now, 5 years now, we're sleeping in the same room, but we're not sleeping on the same bed. Or people will tell you all kinds of things, but families themselves have realized that marriage, the priesthood, every vocation is a work in progress. And there is not so much a question of the problems of the moment, but the development of the inherent capacity which you can glean from friends and culture and history, but also drawing inspiration from the moral basis of your relationship, that things can work differently. And when a man realizes very clearly that he took his wife for granted, or that the wife realizes she took certain things for granted, it is possible for people to go back, renew their commitment, and have a much stronger relationship. Similarly, flawed elections are not necessarily evidence that democracy is not working. Very often it is the over-enthusiasm, but also agents of state, electoral bodies, the police, and so on, that often confuse the president with the state. Very often in our countries, the military, the security agencies believe that they confuse the state with the president. And they think that their obligation and responsibility is not to the people of Nigeria or Ghana or Kenya, but it is protecting the regime that is in power. Rather than dying, democracy can lose its appeal and allure for very many reasons. But often the letter and the spirit of the Constitution are miles apart. Therefore, we must continue to make the point, that citizens' engagement with the institutions and instruments of state is fundamental to how democracy grows in our countries. Rather than believing that democracy is a game of experts and all we have to do is literally choose which club we are going to support. Being involved in...
Okay, Uncle Matthew, you have made your point crystal clear. But I get one question. The fact that no Nigerian newspaper carry all these speeches, I say all these speeches because there's more. Let me play few clips. One from Obasanjo himself. Let's go to the short one.
I recall several decades ago, sir, I had applied to travel to one of these Western countries during a vacation, and I was bounced. And the reason was that I hadn't traveled out of Ghana before. A few months later, we attended Nigeria for the first time to attend a youth conference, and we were taken to the Obasanjo farms in Nota. So Nigeria is my gateway to Africa. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Your Excellency, my brother, the President of the Republic of Ghana, Your Excellency, my brother, the former President of Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Goodluck Jonathan, brought us together. I was not supposed to be talking to you now, but the Executive Director of Goodluck Jonathan Foundation came to me as I was sitting by Bishop Kukah, who is supposed to give a keynote address. I was supposed to have a fireside chat, and I was prepared for that. I don't know where the fire will come from, but I was prepared for a chat. Then she came to me and said, "Do you mind saying something now?" I said, "But you did not warn me that I will be saying something now. You said you should say something." Well, before I was then thinking, what should I say? What should I do? And I want to seek advice from the man on my left, and that's Bishop Kukah, to say, "Bishop Kukah, what do I say?" And I thought he would probably be saying, "Say in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." And even before I could ask him, then the lady, who is the mistress of the ceremony called me up, and you see me coming up feeling unprepared, untutored. Yes. And I listened to the president of ECOWAS, who ended on 3 notes. I will start on 3 notes too. And probably we will deliberate more on those 3 points as the day goes by. Democracy dies because democracy has refused to be reformed. There are 3 aspects of democracy that cannot continue to exist the way it was as defined by the American president. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. And in that definition, democracy is meant to be all people's action. And if democracy will not die and be buried, not just die and be buried, democracy must be reformed in context, in content, and in practice. In my part of the world, we have a saying that the thing that killed the vegetable is the insect in the vegetable. The thing that is killing democracy, and we kill it, is the practice of democracy. All the essentials that should be part and parcel of democracy are being ignored or are being bastardized in such a way that democracy has failed to deliver. And democracy cannot deliver unless it is reformed. And if it's not reformed, it will not only fail, it will die, and it will be buried. And yet, there's not any real substitute for democracy as it was originally designed. Government of the people, all the people. What we have now is not government of the people, the government of some people, by some people, over all the people. And they talk of government democracy as government of the majority. If you talk of government of the majority, what do you do with the minority? Then minority is not part of the people. I hope as we go on today, we will deliberate on this, and probably we will find a means by which we will put new life into democracy through democratic reform. Thank you very much.
To the center of the world, when the best jollof
Is Nigerian democracy threatened? Yes. It is threatened because it's no longer serving the will and the need of the people. It's no longer accountable to the people. It's no longer delivering results that the people require in critical areas of development, education, health, and pulling them out of poverty. Once the democracy is no longer serving the people, is no longer caring for them, is no longer securing them and everything, it's threatened.
Okay. So, please, what are your strategies in the upcoming days to change the government?
It is not my strategy. It is the strategy of the people. For democracy to thrive and survive, the people must own it. They must see it as their own. So it is Nigerian people that have to come out and say, well, listen, we cannot continue in this direction by going out to register their vote, insisting that their vote must count. They must know that their singular vote they have in their hand is what is they will use to ensure that those that elect serve them, those that elect care for them, those that elect prioritize their need in areas of education, health, and pulling them out of poverty, in securing them. So they need to come out and demand right governance through ensuring that people who serve them well are elected. It's going to involve the electoral process and ensure that leaders have the competence, the capacity, the character, and compassion and commitment to lead are elected.
Hey, Bila, I say this is not a coincidence that Goodluck Jonathan, who is who who they do his annual Democracy Foundation Democracy lecture. I don't believe that he choose to take it to Ghana for the sake of it. He took it to Ghana because of this guy right here, Tinubu. And the theme of that lecture is how democracy die again. For what? For no other reason. What? Because of this guy Tinubu. Because how come the same day that he's been completing 6 months, will they take Fubara out of power forcefully? To which this is where I agree with those that are saying democracy had died and that it needs to be saved. I agree. What Tinubu did was unacceptable. But if this is their way of fighting back, we'll be interested. So they set up the democracy dialogue on the very day that Tinubu 6 months is expiring. Since emergency ruling Rivers to be expired. I don't know. There are just too many. There's just too much to it for it to be for me to see it as a coincidence. I think this is how next election is going to be fought and won. Those who are defining democracy and those who believe need to be revamped. I think that's what happened. But it's a developing story. We will see. President Bola Tinubu has suspended emergency rule in River State and reinstated the governor of Similai Fubara. Recall that the emergency rule was declared in the sixth month ago following a series of political crises between Fubara and the Minister of FTC, Nyesom Wike. Tinubu, in a statement on Wednesday, September 17, directed the suspended governor to resume work on Thursday, September 18, tomorrow. President Tinubu also directed the Deputy Governor Ngozi Mma and members of the Rivers State House of Assembly to resume their duties. Meanwhile, oh my God, directed. Like I said, a king. When a king, it's fucking crazy, man. People, a whole state elected person. One man sit down for we are saying, fuck it now. No, I don't know. It just fucking hard to swallow. I just can't believe it's happening in real time. Anyway, meanwhile, a chieftain of the All Progressive Congress APC, Twenko, has stated that the governor Simi Fubara will find himself in a challenging situation after his restatement. Of course, Ko made this assertion on national TV this morning, briefing on Wednesday. According to him, after the suspension is lifted, Fubara will not be able to make any decision as governor without interference. Of course, that's what it means. He lamented that the godfatherism fight is not good for democracy. He said Governor Fubara will be finding himself in a very difficult situation. The godfatherism fight is not good for democracy because the people tend to suffer a lot more. We don't know what we are going to see tomorrow, but one thing that we are sure about is that the governor is not in a position to make any decision. I don't blame him for coming to that conclusion. However, I want to say because it just doesn't doesn't happen anywhere. Doesn't happen anywhere. That's why I'm talking about uh, uh, dual sovereignty. Let every state have its own sovereignty. All this shit will not be happening. How somebody could just sit down for Abuja, we just thought say come, I don't like that man. Regardless of what happened, that's how history will interpret it. History is going to interpret Tinubu to be a man who hates democracy, a man who wants to destroy democracy. That's how they're going to frame it. So let's read whatever the rules. In a statement, let me see. Statement by President. Let's statement by His Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu, President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, on the cessation of the state of emergency in Rivers State. My fellow countrymen. Oh my God, you get it. I'm very disrespectful. My fellow countrymen, and in particular the good people of Rivers State. Don't carry us enter Wahala. This is my fellow countrymen. Carry man. It's not gonna cut it. It's not gonna work, sir. I'm happy to address you today. Now only you there happy. that the state of emergency declaration of Rivers State will return and you will recall that on the 18th March 2025, I proclaimed a state of emergency in the state. In my proclamation address, I highlighted the reason for the declaration. The summary of it for the contest. The summary of it for contest is that there was a total paralysis of governance in Rivers State, which had led to the governor of Rivers State and the House of Representatives being unable to work together. Critical economic assets, Rivers State and the House of Assembly being unable to, okay. Critical economic assets of the state, including oil pipelines, were being vandalized. The State House of Assembly was crisis ridden, such that members of the House were divided in two groups. 4 members worked with the governor, while 27 members opposed the governor. The latter group supported the speaker. As a result, the governor could not present any appropriation bill to the House to enable him to access funds to run Rivers State. I fear that serious constitutional emphasis brought governors in the state to a standstill. Even the Supreme Court, in one of his judgment in a series of cases filed by the Excellency and the Legislative House of Rivers State against this order, held that there were no government in Rivers State. My intervention, and that of other well-meaning Nigerians to resolve the conflict proved abortive, as both sides stuck rigidly to their positions to the detriment of peace and development of the state. It is therefore becoming painfully inevitable that to arrest the drift toward anarchy in Rivers State, I was obligated to invoke the power conferred on me by Section 305 of the 1999 Constitution as amended to proclaim the statement of emergency. The office of the governor, deputy governor, and elected members of the State House of Assembly were suspended for 6 months in its first instance. The 6 months expired today, September 17, 2025. I thank the National Assembly, which, after critical evaluating the justification for the proclamation, took steps immediately, as required by the Constitution, to approve the declaration in the interest of peace and order in Rivers State. I've also thanked our traditional rulers and the good people of Rivers State for their support from the date of the declaration of the state of emergency till now. Come, what the fuck, man? I'm not unaware that there were a few voices of dissent against the proclamation, which led to the institution that was forced to change and the courts and the court to inevitably declaration. This is the way it should be in a democratic setting. Some cases are still pending. Emergency is an inbuilt constitution tools to address situation of actual or threatening. Breakdown of public order and public safety, which require extraordinary measure to return to the state of peace and order security. Considered objectively, we had reached that situation of total breakdown of public order and public safety in Rivers State, as shown in the judgment of the Supreme Court on the dispute between the executive and the legislative arm of Rivers State, it would have been a colossal failure on my part. These people, with time, we will know what they are out to. So we have two groups, one in Ghana, some here in Nigeria. We'll see. One led by Tinubu, one led by shouldn't Peter Obi there now? Peter Obi there. I think we know there. And that's another observation. No northern political elites were there. What's going on? Are they not for democracy or they are against democracy? Either way, we shall continue this story, ladies and gentlemen.